On tonight's Cover One Buffalo podcast presented by William Mattar Law Offices, we will break down the Buffalo Bills defensive line and explain why pass rush is more important than coverage. But first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, It's Tuesday. What are we doing here?
Yeah, well, it's my fault because Town's got some fireworks tomorrow for the 4th of July, and I was like, oh, man, I don't know.
You gotta go watch fireworks.
I don't know. And now, though, we did all this switcheroo, and now, I don't know, the weather's looking maybe suspect around fireworks time. We'll see. Maybe some rain. I don't know. That'd be a bummer to switch everything around. But before we go any further, I want to just let everyone know that I did not agree to the pass rush is greater than coverage messaging from the Cover One Buffalo show. I'm not going to argue. We're not here to argue about it tonight. I think they're both very important, but I just wanted to, I was not on board with that. That got thrown in here. That was not part of me.
He did not fully endorse. He did not sign
endorse
off on
this.
The messages at the opening are not endorsed by management of the show.
Yeah.
We could actually have a fun 4-way discussion, me and Joe Marino against you and Bruce on pass rush versus coverage. I think everyone who intelligently follows football knows it's a symbiotic relationship. They both support each other, and at most it's 55-45 based on the scheme. Like, you can't have one without the other. So the idea of which is more impactful, which can do what more quickly, there's no perfect pass for getting sacked. There's but if you guys covered and he's not open anyways, you can't get it to him. Nobody
can sack Patrick Mahomes.
Correct. Yeah. There's no actual answer to it, but it is a fun debate. And I do think as different rules of the game get tweaked, you see some edges here and there. You see the huge explosion of the cover 2, and what that forced teams to do. And now as teams adjust back to more heavy condensed sets, more running the ball, is that going to open things back up? The next couple weeks, as Aaron and I take you guys through our 3 defensive position previews, we will kind of have some of that discussion. So tonight is the defensive line. We'll talk through the D-ends and D-tackles, the guys who are on the roster here. And Aaron, we're going to start it with the same game we did last time. We'll do 3 Bills players and a lie. Are you aware of Branson Dean, Rondell Bothroyd, and David Egwabuge?
I know Egwabuge for sure.
I obviously Rondell Bothroyd is too abstract of a name for me to even make up to try to trick you.
Yeah.
I did not know that was a human who existed until I prepared for the show.
Preparing for the show, I saw the name. I did not know how to pronounce the Bothroyd. And I did see Branson Dean.
I saw the Branson Dean signing come across my timeline earlier, but I don't know that I was familiar with his game.
None of these people matter to me, and I will continue to not pretend like they don't exist. No offense to them. I don't want to ever.
God bless them. They're in an NFL training camp right now, and I'm not.
Correct.
So good for them.
Correct. And you might see
way to go.
Yeah, you'll probably see at least one of them end up on a practice squad here for maybe not if not 2. But in terms of prepping for the Bills season, sort of irrelevant to me and not part of this conversation.
Yeah. So obviously we're going to spend the majority of the show tonight talking about the 8 gentlemen over here. So we'll leave that as it is. Let's kind of start.
I had a whole section for Eli Ankou. No, we're not going
to. we're going to condense the Eli Ankou
okay.
Section. But as we talk through here, I think some of the additions are going to make it tough. Kingsley Jonathan's a guy who I want to be careful with the word flashed because, I mean, he had 8 pressures in 73 pass rush snaps. That's an okay ratio. It's not like it was some when you look at like Khalil Shakir in his earliest season where you saw like, oh my gosh, if that extrapolated to higher snap count or higher targets, he'd be number 1 in the NFL. There wasn't anything like that. His win rate was still like 11th on the team. And even if you take out some of the like, blitzing guys that inflate that number a little bit, he was still like 9th out of there. So it's not like there was some enormous production, but I think that, he had some moments and I think he flashed a little bit. I think we're going to talk tonight about why it's going to be really difficult for him to make the team, but he's the kind of guy at his age where I won't be shocked if somebody took a stab at him as a 52nd, 53rd spot.
Sure.
He did get claimed last year in Chicago, and then we brought him back. So you can see that. Cameron Klein is a guy who has been claimed back and forth on Indy's 53-man roster and on ours going back and forth.
Yep.
Now you get into, we actually have, our kind of third rung, our defensive linemen 9 through 12 is in a spot where we actually have guys who have all been on rosters. So Casey Toohill has been on a roster every single season of his career. Deshawn Williams has been on a roster each of the last handful of seasons, including both of them with several starts. Casey Toohill had 5 sacks last year. Deshawn Williams has played in like every game, the handful of the last couple of years. Javon Solomon is a 5th-round pick. 5th-round picks make rosters. They just do. Like there will only be maybe 1 5th-round pick who gets released in the NFL this year. Like 5th-round picks make rosters. And Eli Ankou, we've seen come in and play some legitimate nose tackle. So out of those 4 guys, and I guess you can throw Kingsley Jonathan, Cameron Klein, if I think we both agree that Javon Solomon is going to make the 53. Do you think there's a guy who pushes for a 10th defensive line spot, or would the other 3 just be all priority practice squad, and we would hope to get Toohill, Ankou, and Williams for they each kind of can play different roles? We would just love to have all 3 of them back on the practice squad.
So this is interesting, right? Because like Casey Toohill prior to the draft, it was like, okay, like, yeah, I can see that role as a rotational guy, and Deshawn Williams sort of same thing. But then you draft at these positions. And to your point, like you have a 5th-round pick, you have obviously Dewayne Carter that pushes everything down and it pushes these guys back. And I haven't done any like roster predictions yet or anything like that for 53-man roster predictions. But the way we've been talking on the offensive side of the ball, we were talking about that offensive line and keeping extra guys there, and talking about wide receiver room and maybe an additional guy there, and keeping somebody, we're talking about maybe it's going to be more linebackers
next week, going from 5 to 6 linebackers.
Yeah, especially with the new special teams rules. So there's going to be a game here with that roster management. And for me, in looking at the talent and the depth, it doesn't seem like defensive line will be the place that necessarily they carry heavy. I know the Bills love to have those rotations, but I do think they're going to be able to carry on the practice squad 2 to 3 of these guys that we're talking about. They probably lose one. I could see them losing a Cameron Klein or a Kingsley Jonathan, but I think they'll be able to retain a couple of these guys and be happy to have them on the practice squad as those reserve type players.
I agree. And I think that we'll talk about it. The versatility of a couple of the other guys we're going to talk through, I think is going to allow that. I think is going to make it that they'll have some options that can kick around different spots. We actually have, for the first time that I can ever remember, we're going to have 2 legit one techs at the same time that can both do other stuff and actually pass rush a little bit. We haven't had that combination in forever. So having that helps a lot as well. So again, I think that Casey Toohill, again, he had 5 sacks last year. He had 5 sacks last season. So obviously you're talking about a guy who can come in and do that. John Robert here saying, I don't think Williams makes the 53. I agree. I think there was a point where I did think Deshawn Williams was going to be the 9th defensive lineman because he can play both defensive tackle and defensive end. And now I think he's kind of the priority number 1 veteran on the practice squad that can come up because he could fill a ton of those spots depending on what's there.
Yep.
So let's go into now Do you want to start with the starting detail, the D tackle group or the DN group of that top one?
Let's start on the inside and work our way out.
Okay.
I think makes sense to
So-
do, because actually so before we even get into the groups, I'm super excited that we switched the defensive side of the ball. Like, everybody talks about obviously Josh Allen, and there's issues on the offense. Everyone's excited for the offense, but the loss on the defensive side of the ball, I think, has people down on the defense of all the players that they lost and stuff like that. But I don't know, Greg, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, but I feel like I'm super excited about this new Bobby Babbitt led defense. But a lot of it starts with if Daquan Jones and Ed Oliver are healthy, and that they both, when healthy in the last year and a half, have played at all pro levels. Like, if you get them both healthy at all pro levels, to your point, pass rush coverage, like that could be something special that's not getting talked about enough. And then next week when we get into the linebackers, if those two guys are healthy with these two guys, like that, this defense gets me super excited. And I don't feel like it's being talked about enough.
I agree 100%. I think that there's all of the attention is on the offense, and rightfully so. Like there's probably more unproven elements on the
And
offensive
score
side,
points
so
to
there's
win.
more
I
to
get it.
speculate. And points are fun. I enjoy points. Points are a lot of fun.
For sure.
But I agree. I think that there's probably a bit more potential for improvement and bounce back, specifically from this group, from a health standpoint, than what I think people realize, because other than Ed Oliver and AJ Epenesa, which those two were pretty healthy last year, everyone else in this group was coming back from an injury and had really, really high levels of play prior to those injuries. And now we're kind of seeing, hey, we're healthy this offseason, that no one's recovering from an immediate injury. They're all kind of in the year after the recovery year, the year and a half after ACL, a year and a half after Achilles. Gregory Rousseau had a foot injury last year that, obviously didn't require surgery or anything like that. So that interior group, I think this is one of the more complementary groups that we've had, where before we would kind of debate like, well, Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips are built like one techs, but they kind of play like a three tech. And like we have, different guys, and Poona Ford can kind of be a one tech, but he also does a little bit of this. Now we have much more defined group. So Daquan Jones is a one tech who can pass rush and push the pocket. Austin Johnson is kind of a lesser version of Daquan Jones, where he is a one tech, but he can push the pocket a little bit. Both of them have had production. Nothing like the early part of last year in Daquan Jones' season was elite, high level production. If we get anything close to that, it's going to be amazing. But again, that was by far the best stretch of his whole career. Then Ed Oliver had the best season of his career, and now we have Dewayne Carter, who is a legit three tech. And that's what he plays. He is a three tech. So we have, I think, the most defined roles and complementary setup of starter, backup that we've had in a while, with the option that we know Daquan Jones can push the pocket a little bit. And now when it's third and long, we have some defensive ends, we'll get to that can kick inside, but we don't have to do that because we now have two pass rushing three techs that you can just put Ed Oliver and Dewayne Carter next to each other on 3rd and 11, because go ahead, I dare you to run. What are you going to do? So I kind of like that it's a little bit more defined, and we have like a guy that can come in that I don't feel quite as bad about where it is. And we actually have depth at both spots with a defined one, rather than, well, we have some guys who can do some stuff that are the backups. We have a guy that, hey, no, when he's out, this guy comes in. When that guy's out, this guy comes in.
Yeah, and to just kind of put the cherry on top of that, and especially on the front end of this unit, 3rd in sacks among defensive tackles at Oliver with 11, 5th in PRP. That's PFF's grade where they put everything pass rush productivity grade, where it's sacks, hurries, pressures
hurries,
per
quarterback
snap,
hits,
per passing snap or whatever. He was 5th in that among all people with 20% of snaps or more.
And just to give some reference to that for fans, the only people ahead of him in that one in particular is Chris Jones, Justin Madubuike, like the Aaron Donald. Like those are the 3 guys there. And then I think he was tied with who, I'm not sure who was 4th. But like the absolute elite of the elite defensive tackles. And then at Oliver, like he had an elite season.
And Daquan Jones was there before his injury. And then if you add in plus the playoff plus regular season for him, because he obviously played more again once we got into the playoffs, he was 8th in PRP in the NFL, and he had a fourth in win percentage. So the two of them together, even if like I'm fine, you can take Daquan Jones off the field in some of those known passing snaps and get Carter some reps in that. But the two of them, the way they can rush the passer from the interior, which I've been an advocate of, interior pressure is almost greater than outside pressure. I know edges get paid good, and obviously those are your closers and stuff. But that interior pressure is real, and it impacts some of the best quarterbacks out there. And we see what Chris Jones is an absolute game wrecker. Now he lines up a little bit everywhere, but we saw what Aaron Donald has been able to do in his career. What Chris Jones, like those guys that can rush from the interior, create so much havoc. And I think Ed Oliver, these numbers don't tell the story of his season, because I probably saw 15, 16 sacks in it, like just guys that got away, and like the type of disruption that he actually had.
Pushed him into somebody else's arms.
Absolutely. Assisted sacks, things like that. And so just within this, we haven't even gotten to the edges yet. That there's a lot there to be excited about in terms of rushing the passer and getting after quarterbacks, which is what Bills Mafia has wanted all along. And when you look at this group again, when you look at the whole entire defensive line, I think one thing that gets skewed a little bit, Greg, is the performance in the playoffs versus what they did in the regular season. And I don't know that it's always a fair way to judge, because like you're dealing with the best offenses. You're going up against Patrick Mahomes, who nobody really has figured out. But they were 4th in sacks. They were 3rd highest in stuff percentage. And they were 4th in adjusted line yards through FTN Fantasy, which that's all top 5 stuff that you want your defensive line to be doing. And that was without Daquan Jones on the field for most of the season. That would, like, to your point, without a healthy Von Miller, without a totally healthy Greg Rousseau. And so having these guys healthy, the sky's the limit for what they're going to be able to do.
Yeah. And I think, so Mike here was asking about Daquan's excellent, but how would the guys behind him fare? Austin Johnson's easily the best backup one tech we've had in this entire run. He would have been our best one tech prior to Daquan being there. He's been a starting caliber one tech defensive tackle for the Chargers and for the Giants. And
Daquan wanted him
before that. Yes, and Daquan was the guy who wanted. They played together in Tennessee early in his career. So having a guy like him, again, a guy who's like 6'4", 325, both went to Penn State together, actually.
Yeah. I wonder if you see both of them in some like goal line type stuff. Like
100%.
Those are big dudes that you're not moving.
Yeah, having that in goal line sets, especially when you can have guys like Gregory Rousseau, and we'll talk about Dwayne Smoot at defensive end, that kind of strong short yardage defensive line will be very, very nice to be able to have. So again, Austin Johnson is not a superstar, but he's the best depth at one tech we've had in a long time. To be able to have that when Daquan comes off the field, we're not like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We don't have anybody to hold the point of attack or to keep linebackers clean. Austin Johnson can do that. He's not a superstar, but he's a legit one tech starting player. And as John Roberts said here, this is also not Linval Joseph at 38 years old. Austin Johnson just turned 30. Like he's still for defensive tackle perfectly fine.
And this is also a good thing for this is a marathon now, right? You assume if you're building a Bills roster, you're assuming like we're going to make a late run into the season. We're going to be in the playoffs. We're going to be pushing for games. This is also an investment into Daquan Jones in terms of during the regular season, taking some of that load off of him, not requiring him to be on the field for so many snaps. And hopefully Dewayne Carter comes in right away and take some of that load off of Ed Oliver, because Ed Oliver played a crazy amount of snaps last year. And I think that is, again, part of the problem of the Bills defense we see in the playoffs versus the one that we see earlier in the season putting up these crazy stats is we're relying on a lot of these guys because the depth hasn't been necessarily as flush as we want it to be. Or when a guy gets hurt, we're really digging pretty deep down into depth and not having guys that necessarily fit that position. So now you have guys that fit the position that can kind of take some of that load off during the regular season in some games that don't matter as much, get a little bit higher snap counts.
Yeah, I think Daquan Jones had games last year that snuck into 60, even 65% snap share. Now we should be able to keep him at 50 to 55%. Austin Johnson can hold down 30, 35%. And then you're going to have 10 to 15% of the snaps that you don't need a one tech on the field because it's third and long or it's obvious passing downs. And then you can either kick a defensive end inside or have Ed Oliver and Dwayne Carter there to both pass rush. So I know you talked about Ed Oliver and his abilities. But you went through the stats. It was there. Had a fantastic season last year. Awesome videos out here of him working on his footwork and his pass rush game. Kind of
That
stacking.
deal. How
moves
good that deal
together.
looked last year, Greg. Money
Oh, it's
man Greg.
fantastic.
How good did that look?
I know there were people anxious at the time because he hadn't had that breakout yet, but the fact that he's locked up at what he is, and we saw like Christian Wilkins got 23.5, 24 million. Ed Oliver was better than Christian Wilkins last year, straight up. Ed Oliver was better than Christian Wilkins last year, and Christian Wilkins is now making 50% more than him. Ed Oliver is at 16 million. He got 23.5. He got 8 million more than what Ed Oliver got, and getting 50% more of the money. God, that looks good. So, and again, all you want is that guys don't like get the money and then be like, oh, whew, we're good. Like all you've seen is videos about Oliver working this offseason. So I'm excited to see what he comes back with. We talked about Dewayne Carter in our post-show wrap-up after the draft. We've had people, rave about him. We had, our guy John on from the draft show to be able to go through Daniel Harms. Loved him as well. Had him as, I think he had him as like D tackle 2 in this class. So there are people that love him. We'll see where he comes out. A lot of people were excited about him coming out of Duke. People have raved about his abilities off the field, what he was as a leader in that locker room. I'm excited to see it. We don't need a ton from him. We need, give me 30% of the snaps. Give me 35% of the snaps. I don't want an Oliver off the field anytime I can help it.
A more athletic Harrison Phillips.
Yeah. Give me some of that stuff where, I want that Oliver on the field 75. It doesn't need to be 80%, but 75% of the time I want him on the field. So 25% will be as his backup, and then I'll give you the 10% from when there's not a one tech on the field. So if I get 35% of snaps from Dewayne Carter, and maybe some extra reps for some mop-up time at some point in a blowout, I think that's a good season. And I like the fact that we have 4 guys there. We don't really need to carry a 5th defensive tackle, but we have a guy like Deshawn Williams or Eli Ankou on the practice squad who could come in and be able to jump in and help out.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything else on D tackles?
No, I mean, it's probably one of the positions I'm like, in looking at this roster and prepping. Normally I'm a DB guy, and I was like looking through the roster again, ready for this defensive line. And honestly, I think like that interior defensive line, again, knock on that beautiful mahogany behind you. If those 2 starters stay healthy, like I see big things, dude. I see like Daquan Jones was talking about like what are his expectations for this year, and he was saying like my expectation is all pro, and I believe him 100%. Like if he plays the way we've seen him play when healthy,
he was
he's
genuinely on the path to all pro last year.
Yeah, and same with that. I think,
and now Aaron Donald's retired, so like one of the like written in stone all pro defensive tackle spots is opened up and available. Somebody else is going to get it.
Yeah. And so I think, gosh, the 2 of them playing at that type of level, and I think if that trickles into what we're about to talk about next, because if those 2 are playing at that level, it's going to make the job so much easier for what I think is a really nice rotation of defensive ends. And it's obviously Von Miller's got the name, but you don't have a lot of big household names surrounding him on this defensive end group. But I think a lot of very productive players that can do a lot of really nice things and put up some nice production if those 2 on the interior are playing the way that we're expecting, the way we're talking.
Yeah, I think let's start with Gregory Rousseau, and you have your sign behind you. I root for Groot. I think like he's weirdly gotten like underappreciated. I don't really understand. Depending on the source you look at, whether they credit him with 5 sacks or 7 sacks, like the sack production wasn't off the charts, but he was, arguably one of the best run defending defensive ends in the league. Like that's not an exaggeration. One of the best run defending defensive ends in the league, and still put together like 62 pressures, which is a ton. Like 62 pressures is a really good overall season with, again, PFF credits him with 7 sacks because they don't do half sacks. He actually split like 4 different sacks with guys. 14 quarterback hits, which is a good number, and then 41 hurries in the 3 batted down balls. Like I think he had a better season than people thought, even though I know at the surface level it's easiest just to look at sacks. I just think he was better than what people realize.
I agree. 26th in PRP isn't like, that's good for a guy that's not your top Like nobody is trying to sell you that Greg Rousseau is a top Von Miller replacement type edge. He was supposed to be a complement to Von
Correct.
Miller when we
So
signed
he's
that.
supposed to be the strong side guy.
Correct. And I think he does that super well. And I think that he's only growing into this role. And this is kind of the same thing that we saw with Ed Oliver, right? Ed Oliver was a good player, but he wasn't putting up the production that met his draft pick, and it got people frustrated. That was a little bit different because he was a higher pick and there was bigger expectations. But I think being a first round pick, and people see edge first round pick, they expect it to be generating a bunch of sacks and getting all those big numbers. But Groot does all the little stuff already, and he's continuing to grow. He played through injury last year, which a lot of people didn't realize that he was suffering through an injury, and a big, tall dude dealing with a foot injury. That's serious stuff. Like, that hurts. That slows you down. I think he did well through it. I'm expecting, obviously, Bills have some decisions to make with Greg Rousseau. I put out a thing about, hey, if you can only extend one, who's it going to be, Spencer Brown or Greg Rousseau? And both people, that was like factions in my mentions of like people being like, oh, that's a no-brainer on both sides. Like there wasn't a lot of middle ground on this. But it is a big decision. I think that with that's going to lead him to have a really good season. We heard Brandon Beane talk about it. Like, he's doing all the right things. I just listened to Centered on Buffalo, Eric Wood's podcast, which I love, talking to Bobby Babich, and he said, he was asking him specifically about Groot, and he said, hey, he does all the things we ask of him. He knows exactly what we're having him work on, and he's working on it all the time. I believe that, and I think that we're going to see a big leap from him this year, especially, again, if all these guys are staying healthy around him. That's going to help so much. We said, like, he didn't have Daquan Jones most of the year. Von Miller was recovering from injury, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, on that opposite side to take away some of that pressure. And he was still pretty productive on that other end.
Yeah. And, as Mike says here, I think we can extend both. So do I.
I
kind of hope we do.
Yeah, but it's Twitter. I got to put it into people's head and say, like, one or the other.
I think it's Groot for me, but I also don't want to start over again and pick another right tackle. So let's just hope they do both, so I don't have to choose.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a comp for Gregory Rousseau that is another like big, powerful defensive end who was more of a like run game guy, collapse the pocket guy that benefited others early in his career. And then later, now when I say the name, people are going to see him more as, but he's like a big time pass rusher. It's Zadarius Smith. So Zadarius Smith is a guy who plays at like 6'4", 6'5", 275, incredible power, collapse the pocket, be able to bring those guys in there. And later, so his first handful of seasons, and he played all the games, he had 5.5 sacks, then 1 sack, people talking about him as a bust, then 3.5 sacks. So his first 3 seasons, he didn't miss games, and he still had a combined 10 sacks total in the 3 seasons. So being in a spot like that, then he broke out with 8.5, 13.5, 12.5, 10, and had, fantastic production. So yes, what I like that Greg Rousseau had more than 17 sacks in his first 3 seasons, sure. But when you combine those 17 with the, with the production in the run game and being a fantastic run game guy that also has a lot of pressures, a lot of quarterback hits, I think there's a lot of being able to go forward with seeing a breakout, similar to like we saw with that Oliver, where I think it's possible that you could even reach an extension with Rousseau before the year, that everybody's kind of iffy about the number, but if he has a big step forward, it'll look like a value. And we might see that breakout here in his 4th year. Because as others have said, John saying here, he's 6'7", 267. He's only 24 years old.
I was gonna say, he's so young
that's the kind of guy you want to see. Plus, didn't play that whole season because he sat out to help his mom during COVID. That he didn't even play that whole year. So it's a really exciting possibility of what.
Now, will you talk about a little bit when we're talking about Greg Rousseau? We were kind of talking offline when I posted that Spencer Brown or Greg Rousseau, and Greg Rousseau hasn't met all the parameters in terms of that 5th year option, where it's not even that bad. Where Spencer Brown in the 5th year option, like you would rather get an extension done with Spencer Brown at this point and try to get the deal before he hits free agency and gets one of those crazy right. If he has another really good year, we're going to be dealing with a crazy right tackle situation. So you want to get ahead of that curve where Greg Rousseau, you could kind of play it out, and that 5th-year option is not going to be bad.
Yeah, so we talked about it when we did the offensive line show. The numbers for Spencer Brown are going to be scary. It's just how scary, because big athletic right tackles who play every game get paid. They just do. So fortunately for us, Gregory Rousseau missed. There are 3 different levels of escalators for the 5th-year contract. One is if you're a multiple time Pro Bowler or All Pro, or if you get 1 Pro Bowl, or the third one is if you play 75% of the snaps in 1 season or 50% plus in 2+ seasons. And he played 49% and change and 48% and change twice. Yeah. So because of that, his 5th-year option was the lowest tier cost, which was $13 million. So it's still $13 million. It's a real amount of money, but the next one would have been 17 million. The next one up would have been like 21 million, or the franchise tag level when you're an All Pro is almost 24 million. So it's way, way more money. So we really lucked out in being able to, find a path that can get him onto the roster this year and next year at a pretty reasonable number. And ideally, we can try to leverage that into an extension.
I was going to say, would the extension include that 5th year as that year and then pay more?
So you would
buffer the salary cap out?
It wouldn't stop his agent from, asking for whatever they want to ask for.
Sure.
But it helps lessen the average of the overall when one of the years is already locked in at 13. So, he's probably not far off of what Ed Oliver asked for, and it's probably going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe we played Gregory Rousseau $15 million a year. But it could also be one of those things where, well, if he comes out and has another season where he's a top 5 run defending guy and has 12 sacks, well, then he would have got like $23 million a year. So
at 6'7",
correct, at 6'7", 275, and being 24 years old and all the other fun things, and actually just turned 24. So he's going to be 24 this entire season. Let's flip to the other side here and talk about AJ Epenesa. He was probably the one that I was the least sure about from a retention standpoint, because I thought somebody else was going to give him a ton of money. So then when we brought him back, I was like, oh, great. How much money? And it's only $4 million this year. It's only like $10 million total. I can't be mad at that. Like I just like, that's not bad. That's not bad money. He was productive last year. He played really good, legit solid in run support. He had good sack production. He's a solid player, and now is being paid a solid amount of money. He's had 6.5 sacks each of the last 2 years. He did that on pretty low, snap count percentage. I think it's reasonable that maybe there's a little bit more there. So I was a little torn on whether we'd bring him back or not, but at the number, I think it's a really strong signing.
Yeah, that going into free agency, it was like, love to have him back. Again, I thought I could have seen a New England overpaying for a guy like that and bringing him in. But yeah, you get it back at a decent deal. We just talked about Greg Rousseau having the 26th pass rate or PRP from PFF. AJ Epenesa was 28th, 8.7, just 0.1 behind Greg Rousseau. So he's productive in the pass rush game. Like you said, on a limited number of snaps. I think he's a perfect rotational piece for this defensive line that can be a solid run defender, but also get after the passer. And again, all of this looked a little worse last year because Von Miller was hurt. So if you had Von Miller in the spot he was supposed to be, even an 80% of Von Miller that we saw the year before, everything else that we're talking about here at the defensive end looks better. Like that is, you built out this unit with him as the crown jewel of it. And then you had these sort of auxiliary pieces in Greg Rousseau and then in AJ Epenesa as your rotation of these guys. It's going to look better if Von Miller can get to 80% healthy, which is what we're going to talk about next. That I'm getting a little excited, Greg, here about Von Miller and the return. I have to pump my own brakes here on Von Miller a little bit?
I was so down on Von Miller, I had already braced myself that, listen, it's just a sunk cost. There's no benefit in cutting him because it costs more money to cut him than to simply keep him. So it is what it is. He has to be here and we'll get by. So, if you go back and look, there were legit flashes at the end of the season in the playoff games where we saw some of the get off and some of the bending of the corner that we saw previously. Then you saw some things with, the pass of the sack summit and having guys down there, who am I drawing? I was going to say Brian Bosworth, Baldinger.
Baldinger.
Baldy was down there doing video breakdowns.
God, can you imagine the universe where Brian Bosworth doing
is a
breakdowns on? Yes.
I need that in my life now. So Baldinger was down there doing, talking at the Patch Row Summit, talking from the offensive line standpoint and going through there, and lots of people, Eric chiming in here that, 18 months is actually how long it takes for an ACL, and that, yes, you can technically be back there. And I haven't seen the context of his comments of, I'm mad because I shouldn't have been out there. I don't believe that he was directing that at the team, because he's the one who told everybody that he was ready to go and ready to play and wanted to be out there. So I have a feeling he was speaking kind of abstractly about being mad at himself about putting himself out there when maybe he wasn't ready. So I haven't seen those comments, but assuming that that's what he meant, because I'm going to assume that he wasn't directing that at the team, because he sure as hell shouldn't have directed that at the team. He is right that we do see significantly better production in the second year after that. And it's been repeated over and over and over again from so many other players that we've seen look better in that next year. And I won't lie, some of the videos of him working in the offseason, some of that explosion is looking pretty good and is looking like it's back. And he wears those super short shorts with his thighs sticking out, like
yes, he does.
Like, good Lord, he's built those back up. I don't know. I'm not ready to be excited yet, but if we get any semblance of, and I'm not talking about peak Von Miller, I'm talking about our Von Miller, like the 33-year-old Von Miller that we had, in that he's the one who had the game-ending sack against Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was pretty game close to peak Von Miller, that the first few stretches of weeks there before he got hurt.
Whatever version that was, if we even get flashes of that, if we even get glimpses of that, if we even get a few moments of that mixed in with some legitimately playable defensive, like he had so many reps when he first came back last year, where it was just looping around the defensive end and behind the quarterback, looping around the offensive tackle and behind the quarterback, looping around the offensive tackle and behind the quarterback over and over and over again with that heavy brace on. That if we get legit production and it's not just a sunk cost of, well, we got to pay him so he's on the roster, that can change the math of so much of this, of what the other guys can play off of, especially if we're getting pressure from the inside. If we see a step forward from Gregory Rousseau, all of a sudden you now get a little bit there. And I want to say, not only does Eric want the best version of him at the end of the year, I'm still shocked, but Von Miller gave money back to the team and let them take guaranteed money. He did not have to do any of this. And they let them convert guaranteed money that he could have just continued to accept the checks for, and let them put them into not likely to be earned incentives with legit thresholds at like 4, 6, 8, and 10 sacks. That he doesn't get all that money back unless he gets 10 sacks. Otherwise, he just gave money away. And the Bills going to the Super Bowl and him playing 30% of snaps in the Super Bowl. Like, he gave them money back unless he helps them achieve that of him. Because if he gets 10 sacks and plays 30% of snaps in the Super Bowl, he can have all the money. He can have all the money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Couple things on Von Miller real quick. One, I want to preface all conversations that I have about Von Miller going forward with, like, I don't know if he did what he did or is being accused of or not. I'm only here to talk about the football that Von Miller is going to play for the Buffalo Bills. I don't have an opinion on that. And so every time I talk about him, I get people in my mentions being like, well, I hated him because of this. And it's like, okay, but I'm here to specifically talk about the football stuff until that stuff comes back up or is proven or whatever it is. So let's get
And
that out of the way.
Yeah, all we know is that who is still the mother of his child and still his live-in girlfriend now, they live together now
Right.
today. Rick said that was not the case, and that since then there also has not been any charges brought. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, that we've had that situation in the past, but that's all we know, and all we can talk about is football.
But he's going to play football for the Buffalo Bills this year, and for that, I'm excited. Last year, Greg, I felt like I was going a little bit crazy, dude. You heard me on here week in and week out defending Von Miller in terms of what everybody was saying in the comments. Like, it takes a long time to recover from these ACLs. And now, was it Von Miller's fault for pressuring the team to get him out there too early and believing in him to get him out there too early? I don't know. I don't know who was at fault. I don't know who was to blame. It was too early. It looked too early. He was not productive. There was times where he was probably a hindrance to the team being out on the field and not helping at all, and that stinks. I was also disappointed that he wasn't.
In fairness to him, probably a bit of the training medical team's fault for believing him and not saving him from himself.
Sure, yeah. I mean,
so it is not the team's fault, but it's probably not also 100% Von's fault.
Yeah, and those guys
they
are
believed
the Hall of Fame. They believe the Hall of Fame dude that knows his body too. Like he knows himself. Yeah. And so it's a weird situation. I'm not looking to point fingers or blame anything, but what I was trying to defend was that we weren't going to see Von getting back until Christmas. Like that was kind of what I was saying the whole time. Like when people, before we even knew when he was coming back, I was saying it's definitely shouldn't be before Thanksgiving. It should probably closer to December. And then I think I was looking a little bit right as the season went on and we got into the playoffs. We saw him getting closer to the Von Miller that we expected to see return, which wasn't going to be 100%. It was going to be a shell of himself, but returning. And we saw him get shiftier. We saw him get bendier. And I thought his best game was the playoff game, the last playoff game against Kansas City. He was running around. He had speed. He had a little bit of that bend. And that gave me a lot of optimism going into the offseason that, man, like, hey, we could get 65-70% Von Miller back, almost guaranteed. Like if he just has a good healthy offseason, we're going to get that. I'm not a guy to bite on these like off-season workout videos. I really am not. You know me, Greg. Like I've been doing this a long time. I don't bite on that stuff. I am so drunk on the Von Miller content right now, and I am buying in so hard on a big Von Miller return. And the fact that he's betting on himself by taking less money, like
out of all the things, like
yes.
I believe in the power of positive thought. Like I think that's a real thing. I believe in that too. I try to speak aspirationally as well. I talk about the things I want to accomplish and do, and I use that to drive myself.
Sure.
He does it to the 10th degree more than me.
Yes.
And I also don't do it publicly in front of people all the time, not in my real life. Like obviously I talk here in front of people. So I appreciate it. He does it way, way more, but he does it so much that it becomes hard to not believe him, but you have to take everything he says with an enormous grain of salt because he speaks aspirationally about like what he wants to achieve.
But he's achieved more things than not.
Oh, and he's achieved a ton of them, a ton of the things that he said he was going to do, almost all of them.
Yeah.
The one thing that I will say is even people that do that don't play with their money.
Right.
Like it's easy to say that. The fact that he literally put his money where his mouth is, like that's such a cliche, but he took, like he didn't have to do, the team had zero leverage. They had no leverage against him. They were going to have to just eat enormous chunks of money, way more than what he counted than what he was going to cost them now. And he gave that back and allowed them to convert it into incentives that he says. And then when it first happened, I actually had it back and forth. So Matt Rich Warren, who was the former editor of Buffalo Rumblings and now has a different role with that Vox Media, is also a very informed salary cap guy. He and I go back and forth a lot on some of those different things. And he was very skeptical initially, but they probably put it as like you get a third of the money back at 1 sack and the second third of 2 sacks and all the rest of 3 sacks. And the fact that it's like you don't get anything back until 4 sacks, and then it was 4, 6, 8, and 10. And that a legitimate chunk of the money at Jim Jack here saying NFLPA didn't like Von giving money up to. That's 100% accurate.
Yeah.
They did not like that he did this. And that some of the guaranteed money was literally put into him having to play 30% of the snaps in the Super Bowl. Like, you can't ask more than that. Like, he didn't have to do those things and help the team out by putting aggressive goals out there for himself.
Yeah, I'm bought in. I'm back on the Von train.
I love you.
And if I was saying all along, like, if we can get back to 80% Von, I think people thought that was aggressive at his age and with the injuries. I think we can get back to 80% Von, and 80% Von to me is like pushing double-digit sack guy in game-wrecking closer guy, and that's really all we need him to be. I think the group that we just talked about, you have guys that can do all the grunt work, do all the dirty work, but if Von Miller can just be that bendy, twitchy, setting guys up, ghosting guys on the edge, closing out games, closing out drives, dude, like that's the missing piece to everything we just talked about along this defensive line. And that's got me super excited. I hope he stays healthy. I hope he plays this out, but I'm 100% buying into the Von Miller train right now.
So one of the last pieces that I'm going to use as my William Mattar here to help, because like William Mattar, two of the new additions at the defensive end group that were here to help this offseason, I think are going to help allow that for Von Miller, where for the first time in his career, he's always been like a 60, 70, 80% snap guy. And even with the Bills early before the ACL injury, he was still like 55, 60%. I think now we're going to ask him to be a strategically targeted, still 35 or 40%. We want him out there a healthy amount of time, but like on pass rush downs, we don't need him out there the rest of the time. So the two additions, the first one, I think a lot of fans are going to know, it's Javon Solomon. I love, there was some excitement. I think John Robert was the guy talking about him earlier, that he was a big fan of. I will say, I think he made a crazy comment about him starting over Gregory Rousseau. That's not going to happen. But I will say there's reason to be excited. I had Javon Solomon as one of my top value picks in the draft when we did like our value draft.
He was at the Pass Rush Summit, by the way.
Yes. So I love the fact that that Von Miller being the host there has gotten us some extra invites for all of our defensive ends to get to go to the Pass Rush Summit, which is awesome. That's a great learning experience for all of our guys there. Here, John Roberts saying the rumor is Javon Solomon will start as Greg Rousseau's backup. You need to find better rumors. That's not going to happen. But I like Javon Solomon. I think he's going to make the roster. I think he's going to be game day active. I think he's going to be out there to play, and is going to help with what's going on. But the real one that I have as my here to help is maybe, I think, the most under the radar addition. I take that back. I'm going to have another one in the DB show that I think a handful of people literally don't know is on the roster. That's a DB that I think is going to make the team. But my guy for the defensive line group here is Dawuane Smoot. Dawuane Smoot is a player who had 4 straight seasons with the Jacksonville Jaguars where he had 6, 7, 7, and 6 sacks, 5.5 plus every single season. At the end of the 2022 season, he tore his Achilles. So last year, he was on the PUP list at the beginning, then kind of slowly got his way back last year and didn't look like himself, but now did his workout, did the physical here, and we got him on a pretty cheap deal. It was like $2.5 million guaranteed. We used one void year to kind of spread the money out into next year. And he's a guy that has been like a really nice addition and can now be a solid backup to Gregory Rousseau. Like, that is our strong side defensive end, that he can come in and play when Groot's not in there. He can also kick inside and pass rush from the 3-tech when we need it. He can play all over the place on the defensive line and is a very nice, well-rounded backup. So similar to our comments about Austin Johnson as a 1-tech backup, where he's not a superstar, but he's a nice player. Like, that's a really nice depth piece. Whereas, right now, and this is not throwing shade at these guys, but, Shaq Lawson is still a free agent and hasn't signed anywhere else. Jordan Phillips got a veteran minimum non-guaranteed deal with the Giants just because they were familiar with him. We'll see if he makes that roster. Tim Settle got a little bit of money from Houston, but we have seen a lot of guys that were on this roster before playing a lot of snaps that now are barely going to make rosters other places. And we've brought in guys who were not only, coming in to barely make our roster to be a backup, but, Dawuane Smoot was the guy who was like 660, 670 snaps for Jacksonville every season, like a major, major contributor. And now he's just going to be kind of a fill in the gaps backup for us. That's a really, really nice spot where, he's going to be the reason that I don't think Casey Toohill is going to make this roster. And Casey Toohill had 5 sacks last year. So having those kind of guys fighting to just make our roster and be the rotational backup guy, where last year, our 4th defensive end or 5th defensive end, we didn't even really want on the field. And now we can afford, I won't even be upset if Dawuane Smoot plays more snaps than Von Miller on the whole, like just soaks up more of those early down and easy snaps so we can play him all fourth quarters, all pass rush downs and things like that. We can afford to do that because he's a better player than people realize. So I think he's here to bring more help than what fans realize. I think he's a legit player who's going to be able to make an impactful difference. And as a 4th defensive end, after those guys, we have a significant opportunity to be able to bring that back.
I dig that. And I now know what I sound like when I'm talking about an adequate defensive back. So I appreciate that.
I'll take that.
Yeah. I mean, but that's not a bad thing, right? I think that oftentimes fans, adequate is like very good, especially when it comes to depth. We're talking about a rotational guy here, having somebody that's adequate at their job as a run defender that can get pressure, that can move around as your backup is needed in this league. And I do think that there's a good role for him. Somebody, Mike here talking about a take Shaq Lawson back. I think it is a Shaq Lawson. Like, I think that's what you're getting is getting another type Shaq type back.
Dawuane Smoot's peak was better than Shaq's peak.
Sure.
And he did it for 5 straight seasons. And the last 4 healthy seasons we've seen him were all those kind of seasons of 6 sacks, 7 sacks, 7 sacks, 6 sacks, all while playing good run defense and good power, strong side, like a perfect backup to Greg Rousseau. The same thing where we were really concerned with Daquan Jones would have to come off the field. Now we have Austin Johnson. I was always concerned with Gregory Rousseau would have to come off the field because who's setting the edge, who's playing that strong side. And now we'll have a guy like Dawuane Smoot that it'd be really nice that he can come in and play those 35 or 40% of snaps when Rousseau's off the field at his 60-65%. They're going to be a perfect pair at strong side defensive end.
And now I'm going to give our friend at William Mattar a second segment here. They're getting double the fun here. This one's going to be quick though, and then we'll get out of here tonight. I am going to, so we read off a lot of stats. We talked a lot about this defensive line. I probably hyped some people up, maybe a little even too much here tonight and getting excited about the potential of this defensive line with a healthy Daquan Jones, with a healthy Von Miller, with Ed Oliver doing what he's doing and ascending as the player he is and expecting more out of Greg Rousseau. I want to pump the brakes on myself for a second, Greg, because all of that's cool. All of these stats, these regular season stats are fantastic. Them being 4th in sacks and 4th in run stuff and all that stuff, super cool. And this is going to be a pump the brakes against this whole defense. I'm excited about the defense. I think that they're going to be very good. This defense needs to prove it in the postseason. It's been the Achilles heel of this Buffalo Bills team. A lot of people want to be like, oh, Josh Allen has lost head-to-head games against Patrick Mahomes. No, the Buffalo Bills defense has lost games against Patrick Mahomes. They need to get to the quarterback. They need to make plays. They need to not disappear in the biggest games. And so I'm excited. I think this is going to be a really good unit. I'm going to come on here on post-game shows and pump up these guys for having big games just with you. But I'm nervous into the postseason. Can these units do what they're paid to do, what the Von Miller is paid to do, what we've brought in some of these pieces to do, which is close out games, not be a team that's just getting pushed over, whether it's against the Bengals or the Kansas City Chiefs in these big elimination games. I don't need them to even come out and like hold the team to sub 20, but I don't want this team's gotten run over in the playoffs on defense and look like a shell of themselves from what we see in the regular season to the postseason. So I got to pump my own brakes on, like, they've got to prove it to me And I just wanted to put it out there. Like, this defense, they got to step up when it matters the most.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be an interesting point to see of what Bobby Babich brings to that unit. What, new wrinkles and twists, he can bring to that group. I think that's going to be a big part of it as well.
Yep.
So one last one here. Adam asked, what's Javon Solomon's ceiling in sacks? So obviously he's a 5th round rookie.
No.
So, and we need to be a little bit reasonable here, but I'll say last year, our 5th defensive end got the pass rush on 192 snaps. That's probably high because we had a fair amount of injuries. So more realistically, it's probably like 150 on the season. Kingsley Jonathan played in 12 games. He got 72 snaps. So I would say that ballpark between 72 and 192 is probably about right. So let's split the difference and say it's like 125 to 150. If he has even like a lucky above average conversion rate on that with the number of pressures, usually sacks, quarterback hits, and hurries, a really good player, really, really good, is like 15% of that. So now you're talking, that's probably a total of 18 to 19 total of those, which means if he's really, really lucky and closes on every opportunity he can, you're probably talking 4 or 5 sacks.
Yeah.
So like when you talk about ceiling, just with the number of snaps he's going to be able to play, if he's really, really good and closes every opportunity he has as a rookie, 4 or 5 sacks. Beyond there, it's all projection. There are mid-round guys who have turned into legitimate players, but we have to remember he's a small school guy, got drafted middle of day 3. We have to have reasonable expectations. I liked him a lot. I liked him in the sense that I think he's not just a throwaway day 3 pick. I think he's a roster caliber guy who's going to stay on this team and play. But I do think I believe that he's a 4 to 5 sack guy. I don't know that I see a guy who's going to earn enough snaps to be more than that, but that'd be awesome if he is. That'd be awesome.
That's the ceiling. We need to let him develop, right? Like that. This is the perfect player to get into your system, to hang out with Von Miller, to go to his pass rush summit, to not take a lot of snaps, not be on the field a ton, learn the game, and slowly develop. We just talked about it with Greg Rousseau. Like, he's still in that process of developing into what he was drafted to be as a 1st round pick. And that's taken years. Yeah, that's taken years. So this is going to be a project. It's going to take some time. I think he can develop into a nice player. His impact is going to be special teams, I think, this year. He has that body type and speed and athleticism where I think he's going to be very good for the Bills on special teams. And maybe in situations where if, the situation's right, he's going to get the field, but it's going to be hard for him to earn those snaps away from everyone we just talked about and all the type of versatility of the players that we just talked about. To hit that ceiling, I think, is going to be tough. So I understand why fans will fall in love with the idea of him. He's going to be great on Madden. Like, if you line him up in Madden, like, he's going to have.
He also looks awesome in a t-shirt in a workout.
Yes.
Like, the dude's chiseled out of rock.
And if you go look at the highlights, like, he's a very super productive college pass rusher. I get it. But I don't think that's going to translate right away to the NFL. I think it's going to take some time and be a developmental project. That's a lot of fun. We should be excited about 2 to 3 year developmental projects. That's how good teams stay good.
Correct. 100%. So I think it's great. I think it's exciting. Again, I thought he was a value. I thought he should have got both of our 5th round picks, both him and Van Pran Granger are guys who should have gone higher than that. I think they were top 100 guys who could have been late 3rd, early 4th round picks. And that's great that we got the same thing they have with Khalil Shakir. So we have a good run. Matt Milano was a 5th round pick. We have a really good run of value in the 5th round. So let's hope that continues this year. And we got a future starting center and rotational defensive end. That would be awesome if that's
perfect.
What we got.
We made an hour out of it.
I think we did it. Yeah. Well, we could have had this as 2 separate shows with D tackles and DN. So I think it was, 2 half-hour shows we combined together.
There we go.
The chat was awesome tonight. We appreciate you guys being flexible with us. Before we head out, hear a message from our guy, William Mattar. He'll let you know how to stay safe.
If you've been in a car crash, you should know this. At William Mattar, there's no fee until we win. That means you don't pay us unless we win your case. If you're hurt in a car, call William Mattar, 444-4444.
Thanks again, guys. We appreciate it. But on behalf of our fantastic producer, Chris Kepner and Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are